I still hold in my memory that first dawn when I observed the irregular glow of 3I Atlas scattering across the polarimetric matrix of the observatory. We had just adjusted the instruments following a routine maintenance sequence, and I did not anticipate discovering anything out of the ordinary. Yet, the signal arrived with a peculiar clarity, accompanied by a brief, precise, and muted flat segment that did not correspond to any known atmospheric fluctuations. It was as though an invisible, thin, and exact surface had interposed itself between us and the object's light. This initial impression forced me to hold my breath and verify each measurement with the obsessive care I reserve solely for phenomena that defy my expectations. I began by reviewing the protocols. I checked the calibration of the photometers, the thermal stability of the sensors, the temporal coherence between scattering channels, and the integrity of the mechanical tracking. No errors were found. Each verification reinforced the possibility that the phenomenon was real. With the caution required by an unexpected discovery, I requested the team to activate the extended synchronization of the spectrographs. In their movements, I sensed the silent tension that accompanies nascent discoveries, that blend of discipline and anticipation that transforms the laboratory into a stage of subdued whispers. I turned again to the polarization curves. The light from 3I Atlas abruptly dropped into a state nearly devoid of detectable orientation, only to recover with a purity that unsettled me. The pattern repeated with an irregular cadence, as if obeying a rhythm still concealed. There was no anomalous scattering in the atmosphere, no trace of local interference. The signal came directly from the object, unadorned, without additional noise. It was a behavior that did not align with dust, internal collisions, transient sublimations, or rotating fragments. Something else was modulating this light. Something that did not fit within conventional categories. I began noting every fluctuation, every transition between polarization states, every interval of flattening. As I did so, an idea persistently imposed itself. An impossible coherence was emerging between the emission segments. This was not mere photometric flickering. It was an internal reordering of the light, a reorganization that, in certain Fourier analyses, revealed geometric edges, as if the photons had traversed ordered layers before reaching us. This geometry appeared and vanished with a fluidity that compelled me to rule out traditional explanations one by one. I then requested an adjustment to the observed wavelength. The operation took a few minutes that felt heavy. We feared the observation window might close before the capture was complete. When the instrument stabilized again, I witnessed an even stranger change. The apparent trajectory of 3I Atlas exhibited a non-gravitational acceleration, so subtle that it would have gone unnoticed under normal conditions. It was not a perturbation from nearby bodies or irregular radiation pressure. It was a clean, precise shift, devoid of the chaotic signature typically left by transient phenomena. I reviewed the data in silence, with the sensation that the air between us and the screens had grown thicker. When we overlaid the measurements again, we found that the moments of acceleration coincided precisely with the periods of collapsed polarization. I examined this relationship carefully, seeking to determine if it was a statistical coincidence. But the alignment recurred. There it was again, that unsettling connection between light and motion, as if both were responding to an order we could not yet identify. We activated the high-density capture mode. The light from 3I Atlas began to reveal structures previously hidden in the noise. I saw a modulation emerge within the darkness itself, a pulse that seemed not to affect the overall intensity but reorganized the background with an almost artisanal precision. At first glance, it might have gone unnoticed, but in temporal analysis, it displayed a surprisingly stable cadence. I could not assign this pulse to any known physical category. Natural processes tend to fluctuate, but this rhythm had a firm, almost deliberate character, though I knew I must not allow myself to assume intent in a phenomenon we were only beginning to analyze. While the team compared the data with historical archives, I continued observing the superposition of curves. There they were, the flat segments, the clean recoveries, the geometric edges that appeared only at certain intervals, the non-gravitational acceleration, and like a yet unnamed guiding thread, the dark pulse that seemed to tie everything together. I felt a shiver difficult to describe, a blend of scientific awe and responsibility. I knew we had to remain level-headed. We could not let fascination drive us to premature conclusions. I requested a cross-verification with the secondary station, located several hundred kilometers away. The synchronization took time, but when the data arrived, they matched our primary recordings. There were no local errors. The phenomenon was real, consistent, and extraordinary. No one commented, but the silence in the laboratory transformed into something else, an expectation underpinned by the certainty that we were confronting a behavior unlike any other recorded for cometary or interstellar objects. I continued examining the polarization pattern. On several occasions, during the flat segments, I noticed that the spectrum seemed to contract into a narrower range. It was as if the light were passing through a medium with variable properties, perhaps an environment with characteristics akin to natural metamaterials. The idea was bold and not entirely plausible, but the data persistently suggested an internal reordering, a form of physical manipulation that challenged our traditional interpretations. Nevertheless, I remained cautious. Everything had to be documented precisely, without direct speculation, without straying from the facts. And the facts, one by one, accumulated with unsettling regularity. The light changed when the motion changed. The motion changed when the dark pulse intensified. And the dark pulse manifested only when the luminous coherence reached levels that could not have arisen by mere chance. As I observed the final series of captures, I experienced a sensation difficult to define. It was neither fear nor wonder, but the certainty that 3I Atlas was revealing layers of behavior we had never anticipated. It was as if the object could only unveil itself in fragments, unfolding before our instruments each time we adjusted our gaze. I knew then that this was merely the beginning, that what we had detected that first night would demand even deeper analyses, and that subsequent discoveries would likely be more disturbing than we were prepared to admit. When we began the second night of observation, I had spent hours silently reviewing the previous recordings. Every curve, every fluctuation, every dark pulse traced by 3I Atlas seemed to suggest an order we could not yet formulate. I forced myself to maintain mental clarity. I knew that if the night proceeded with the same intensity as the previous one, it would be essential to preserve lucidity to avoid mistaking coincidences for causalities. Yet within me, I perceived a restrained tension, a kind of inner vibration that reminded me we were venturing into uncharted territory. We activated the high-sensitivity systems and directed the spectrographs to the range where the dark modulation had been most evident. Unlike the previous night, this time the instruments seemed to anticipate the phenomenon. The pulses began registering as soon as we stabilized the signal. Their cadence, though irregular, showed a curious trend. Between consecutive pulses, there were intervals that seemed to cluster around simple proportions, as if an arithmetic pattern were diluted among subtle variations. It was not periodicity in the classical sense. Rather, it was a master rhythm that glimmered through the data without fully revealing itself. The polarization dropped sharply again at several moments, but this time I noticed something different. In each drop, there appeared an extremely brief section where the light seemed to reorganize into a state that did not correspond to any typical configuration. It was as if the light, for an almost imperceptible fraction, adopted a unified, impossible-to-sustain orientation. This fleeting coherence sent a chill through me. I was unprepared to find such an ordered state in an object that theoretically should be governed by chaotic processes of sublimation, fragmentation, or material ejection. I requested an enhancement of temporal resolution. The team responded with the silent precision we had honed over years, though I sensed in their gestures the accumulated unease. They knew the phenomenon was growing in complexity. They knew it was unusual for an object like 3I Atlas to display such internal discipline. The capture began filling the monitors with an overwhelming density of information. I examined the spectral lines one by one, pausing where the signal seemed to narrow. There I observed a new anomaly. Certain peaks split into two components, their separation varying with the dark pulse. It was neither a thermal oscillation nor an instrumental distortion. It was as if the object's internal structure were reorganizing the light's trajectory based on the master rhythm. This correlation compelled us to activate a series of tests we rarely employ in routine observations. I requested that one of the geometric edge detectors analyze the angular distribution of the light during the pulses. Its function is highly sensitive. It identifies discontinuities that may correspond to surfaces, layers, or regions where the medium alters the photon's trajectory. The results appeared on the screen with a clarity that left us motionless. Each time the dark pulse reached maximum intensity, the angular distribution showed an internal alignment inexplicable by random processes. It was as if something within 3I Atlas temporarily took on a form, a fleeting geometry that vanished as soon as the pulse weakened. I took notes with a trembling hand, though I tried to conceal it. I knew that losing emotional control could lead to errors in subsequent interpretations. I wrote each detail in clear handwriting, avoiding any subjective commentary. I had to confine myself to the facts, yet within me, a suspicion was forming that we were witnessing unprecedented behavior. I did not voice it, nor did I allow myself, even in my most private thoughts, to articulate it in definitive terms, but the weight of the evidence pushed toward an increasingly unsettling direction. Then, an event occurred that momentarily halted all movement in the room. The apparent trajectory of 3I Atlas, which until that moment had shown smooth deviations, executed a sudden, measurable acceleration, entirely outside any traditional gravitational framework. It was not a chaotic deviation or a random jump. It was a calculable shift with a clearly defined beginning and end, as if the trajectory had been corrected by an internal impulse whose origin we could not trace. The entire team held its breath. No one needed to verbalize their thoughts. I, without taking my eyes off the monitors, felt a blend of dizziness and extreme clarity. I forced myself to re-examine the data with near-obsessive thoroughness. I confirmed the sensor's integrity, ruled out mechanical failures, verified atmospheric stability, and checked the synchronization between the station's internal clocks. Each verification eliminated alternatives and made the phenomenon sharper. During this shift, the dark modulation intensified to levels we had never seen. The pulses acquired a surprising firmness. And in one of them, we detected the most startling anomaly thus far, a sustained luminous coherence lasting beyond the minimal intervals recorded the previous night. This coherence revealed a new geometric edge, clearer, almost stable. Most unsettling was that this edge appeared aligned with the direction of the non-gravitational shift. It was as if the light and motion were part of the same internal system, as if both responded to a structural rule we could not yet name. We then decided to extend the study to deeper wavelengths, despite knowing the margin of error would increase. We could not miss this opportunity. The object was exhibiting extraordinary, perhaps unrepeatable behavior. When we activated the new range, the data began to reveal a phenomenon that had remained hidden until then, a dark core within the emission curve, not a void, but a region where the light seemed to reorganize according to a pattern that matched no known physical process. It was neither a shadow nor a conventional absorption effect. It was an internal order, an optical space where photons adopted multiple directions before recombining. Analyzing this core, I noticed its behavior also followed the master rhythm. Each expansion and contraction coincided with a dark pulse. At that moment, I realized we were detecting superimposed layers of a unique phenomenon: modulation in the darkness, temporary geometries, impossible coherences, internal accelerations, and spectral reorganization. All were linked by a deep pulse that seemed to act as a mathematical heart within 3I Atlas. I stood silently observing the screen, feeling a mix of awe and astonishment wash over me. I knew we were entering a critical phase. What we were seeing had no precedent. Yet, my intuition told me the most surprising was yet to come. I knew that the third night, if we could observe it, would reveal something decisive. Something capable of altering not only our understanding of the object, but also how we interpret phenomena still hidden at the edges of the observable universe. The third night arrived with a solemnity difficult to describe. It was not merely an observation session. It was the culmination of a process that had utterly transformed our perception of 3I Atlas. Before activating the systems, I paused for a moment in silence, sensing the stillness of the air, as if even the observatory waited with restrained anticipation. I knew that any capture obtained that night would carry historical weight, and at the same time, I feared the object might have abandoned the active phase that had allowed us to record the earlier anomalies. I forced myself to breathe calmly. I adjusted my notes, verified the protocols, and activated the instruments with near-ritualistic precision. The first signal arrived as soon as we stabilized the sensors. There was no adaptation period or preliminary noise. The dark pulse appeared immediately, firm, clear, as if it had been awaiting our attention. Its cadence was slower than in previous nights but also deeper, as if each oscillation contained internal layers that had remained hidden until then. I observed the waveform with a mix of astonishment and extreme clarity. I did not need to compare it to prior recordings to understand that something decisive was unfolding. This modulation seemed to have reorganized itself, adopting a more stable, cleaner structure, closer to its own signature. I focused on the polarization. The light from 3I Atlas descended into absolute flattening over increasingly wider intervals. In this state, the signal revealed a detail that left me motionless. During the flattenings, the light did not transform into a disordered mass, as might be expected. On the contrary, it displayed an internal coherence that persisted despite the absence of global orientation. It was a form of order within disorientation, a phenomenon that defied all foundations of classical physical optics. This coherence without polarization was impossible according to established models, yet it unfolded before our instruments with an almost geometric serenity. I requested an amplification of the spectral range. The team executed the order in absolute silence. As the data began to flow, we uncovered a pattern none of us could have anticipated. Each dark pulse not only reorganized the light's direction, but also modified the spectrum's width. In the maximum intensity phase, the spectrum narrowed to an almost perfect band, as if the photons had passed through an extremely ordered medium. Conversely, in the minimum intensity phase, the spectrum expanded into a broader distribution, without losing the previously detected coherence. It was a behavior that suggested the presence of internal layers within the object, each with distinct optical properties. As we analyzed these variations, an event occurred that completely redefined our understanding of the phenomenon. The apparent trajectory of 3I Atlas exhibited a non-gravitational acceleration more pronounced than in previous nights. It was not a brief displacement or an isolated impulse. It was a sustained, measurable, perfectly defined change that altered the motion vector with a smoothness that left me speechless. I observed the position graph repeatedly, finding no trace of error. It was as if the object had decided, though I avoided even thinking in those terms, to adjust its displacement according to an internal criterion that still eluded us. The dark pulse responded immediately to the trajectory change. Its cadence reorganized, adopting a more complex, almost fractal pattern. At certain moments, the main wave split into subpulses that emerged and merged with disconcerting precision. It was neither noise nor interference. It was a structured, coherent behavior, perfectly linked to the motion changes. This correlation, so clear and yet so inexplicable, produced an even deeper silence among us in the room. We activated a high-resolution geometric edge analysis. We had avoided this procedure until that moment due to its complexity and the immense computational demand it required. However, we knew this was our last opportunity to obtain data under such extraordinary conditions. The system took several minutes to stabilize the capture. When the first reconstructed angular image finally emerged, I felt a shudder that ran through me entirely. The light from 3I Atlas revealed an internal structure during the pulses of maximum intensity, a sharp, almost hexagonal edge that appeared and disappeared in perfect synchronization with the changes in the dark modulation. It was not a physically detectable edge as part of a solid body, but a geometric form in the angular distribution of the light, as if the photons had been guided by an invisible architecture before reaching our instruments. This geometry, impossible to attribute to chance, seemed to emanate from the very heart of the object, revealing itself only in the moments when it reached its highest degree of coherence. While contemplating this figure, the dark pulse underwent an abrupt change. It ceased oscillating between extremes and stabilized at a level we had never seen. In that instant, the light from 3I Atlas acquired an extraordinary clarity. The spectrum narrowed to an almost absolute limit, the polarization collapsed into a perfectly uniform state, and the geometric edges appeared during a surprisingly long window. It was as if all the layers of the phenomenon had decided to align. A total coherence. A complete order. A structure that revealed itself only for a moment. The non-gravitational acceleration reached its peak during this alignment. The object traced a displacement that, had I not seen it with my own eyes, I would have considered impossible. It was not a leap or an erratic change. It was a fluid, impeccable motion, almost natural within its own internal logic. The dark modulation vibrated with a rhythm that remained constant, as if a master pulse had taken absolute control of the object's behavior. And then, as silently as everything before, the signal began to fade. First, the subpulses disappeared. Then the internal coherence of the spectrum. Next, the angular geometry. Finally, the dark pulse reduced to a flat line. That absolute stability, in another circumstance a cause for relief, produced a sense of loss in us. It was as if 3I Atlas had closed its internal layers just after showing us, for a brief moment, the true depth of its behavior. We reviewed the data for hours. There were no errors. There were no distortions. Everything recorded was part of a genuine, coherent, extraordinary phenomenon. I knew that what we had witnessed not only altered our understanding of the object, but also the way we study light, motion, and the hidden structures that may inhabit the margins of the observable. As I closed my final report, I realized that that night would mark a before and after. 3I Atlas, with its master pulse, its invisible geometries, its impossible coherences, and its movements without gravitational cause, had expanded the boundaries of our understanding of the universe. And though we still did not know its true nature, I knew with absolute clarity that the data collected that night would be studied for generations, as the first complete record of a phenomenon capable of forever altering our relationship with the unknown.